Hey, how's it going, friends? Welcome to VR Revelations. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you give the video a like and make sure you subscribe for future coverage. So, we know we have a major war right now going on between Russia and Ukraine, and essentially the United States and all these other countries that support Ukraine. Now, in reality, if you take a step back and you look at the big picture, this is just a continuation of the Cold War, right? The United States, democracy versus communism. Communism is evil. Communism is bad, supposedly. Again, you can get into a uh, philosophical debate about ideologies and try and justify one or the other. But again, that's all they are: ideologies, a way of thinking of people, a way of trying to govern masses of people. And so you have these different types of governments. Some people are for communism, some people are for socialism, some people are for a constitutional republic, some people are for direct democracy. Whatever you ascribe to, the fact is that human beings go to war over ideologies. And is it dumb? Yes. No ideology is perfect. I believe that, the only perfect way is God's way, and that is the Word of God. And so eventually all these conflicts will end up in a nuclear war and will fulfill biblical prophecy. And I think, we're going to end up, fulfilling God's prophecy by destroying each other, destroying ourselves through nuclear war. And again, you can go watch my series on signs of the end times, and you can go take a look at my video, Signs of the End Times Nuclear Weapons, and I talk about nuclear weapons and how they were discovered and for what purpose. And so, yes, we have this major war going on between Russia and Ukraine and the United States, essentially, and NATO. And, a lot of people are scared that, there might be a nuclear conflict over Ukraine. I don't believe so. I don't believe Washington or the United States is willing to risk, their country being struck by nuclear weapons over Ukraine. But since it's like a Cold War scenario, I think they see a golden opportunity to deplete Russian reserves and soldiers in a war that's right on the border with Russia, right? They don't have to send their troops in. They can just supply the Ukrainians and, let the Ukrainians sacrifice themselves. But unfortunately, I think they're not going to go all the way in for Ukraine. And so it seems that Washington has now carried out a simulation of a war scenario between them, Taiwan, and China. Of course, we know that there is tensions right now between Taiwan and China. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details, but if you go take a look at a brief history of Taiwan and China, you'll realize that at one point, yes, China was considered, or rather, what was considered China was the whole land of China and Taiwan, right? This island was part of China. Then there was a civil war. The losing side ended up taking refuge on the island, and the winning side didn't really pursue. So with time, there was kind of like a peace, but mainland China considered Taiwan part of, China. But with time, the United States sort of started supplying weapons to Taiwan and reinforcing it for a future conflict. Again, this is all about ideologies, and these governments are always looking ahead, into future conflicts. And so the U.S. knew that this would, it would be best for their interest if they armed Taiwan in the same way that they were arming Ukraine, in order to sort of create a barrier there, right, to keep China away from them. This would be similar to Russia and China trying to supply weapons to Mexico and missiles and prepare for a future conflict. You see how beneficial that would be. But of course, the U.S. is like the big dog on the world stage. So they would never allow that, even if Mexico or Canada were to allow China or Russia to do that. So again, you can get into all this ideological debate. The fact is that throughout history, human beings go to war over their beliefs. And China has been saying for a while, Taiwan is part of China. Taiwan is part of China. We're gonna, we're gonna assert our authority there sooner or later. But China has kind of messed up actually because they've allowed the U.S. to supply weapons to Taiwan, and so whenever China does try to, take Taiwan by force, sort of like they did with Hong Kong when the British finally gave it back to them, it's going to be a lot more difficult because they actually have to cross the sea here, and of course you're going to have anti-air missiles, anti-ship weapons along the shoreline here, and Biden has, came out there on press conferences saying that yes, they will support Taiwan militarily, but I've watched and observed, and he hasn't said he would support them with troops. So I think a similar scenario would play out like what's going on with Ukraine right now. They would probably just support them with weapons. But now, let's get into the story here. We're going to see that they actually carried out, simulations. So they have these experts, and through computers, through analysis, through predictions, they take a look at potential scenarios and they try to calculate the losses, right? And, what would be the result of a conflict. And so, of course, since the United States carried out this analysis, guess who won according to them, or who would win in a potential conflict between China, Taiwan, and the U.S.? The U.S., right? That's not surprising. Of course, they're not going to say, oh, well, according to our simulation, we lost. Of course not. But I'm pretty sure they realize that this would be a very catastrophic war, probably even more deadly than what is going on right now in Ukraine. Now, again, I don't think the U.S. will actually, go into Taiwan with soldiers. So I think their best bet right now is to supply as much weapons as they can to Taiwan, because, it's pretty much not a matter of if, but rather a matter of when. This is going to happen sooner or later. Xi Jinping has already said that this is pretty much like the core objective of China is, it's one China policy, reunification with Taiwan. And so, they're dead set on establishing, China's authority over Taiwan. And so this is more of like an honor thing for them. For the U.S., this is just a strategic, interest for them, not only militarily, but economically. So again, I think that, this war is going to happen here sooner or later, but I don't think it's going to be what the Americans are thinking it's going to be. So we can see here that we have reports of this apparent simulation they did, right? Or these war scenarios here. Looks like they ran 22 war scenarios with China over Taiwan, and we're going to get into the report here. But again, I know a lot of you might be saying, oh, well, you're looking at Russia propaganda. No, we have it clearly here from CNN, guys. So you always have to verify, your sources, or rather your coverage of news, with at least 2 or 3 sources. And if you can get them from both sides, that's even better. So let's go ahead and take a look at the report here. It says a Chinese invasion of Taiwan in 2026 would result in thousands of casualties among Chinese. So they're estimating, this could be by 2026. I think it'll be before that because, China is aware of all of this, and they know that the longer they wait, the better, the better armed that Taiwan is going to be. United States, Taiwan, and Japanese forces, and it would be unlikely to result in a victory for Beijing. Yeah, that's not surprising, seeing that the U.S. carried out these simulations. According to a prominent independent Washington think tank, again, these are the same experts that said Russia wouldn't dare invade Ukraine because they'll know what'll happen to them, right? And even when Russia was literally moving their army up against the border, they were still in denial. So take all of this with a grain of salt. A war over Taiwan could leave a victorious U.S. military in a crippled a state as the Chinese forces it defeated. At the end of the conflict, at least 2 U.S. aircraft carriers would lie at the bottom of the Pacific, and China's modern navy, which is the largest in the world, would be in shambles. Those are among the conclusions the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, made after running what it claims is one of the most extensive war game simulations. Again, I'm sure they're being a lot more detailed and careful with these simulations, seeing how a lot of experts got their predictions wrong concerning Ukraine. It claims it is one of the most extensive war game simulations ever conducted on a possible conflict over Taiwan, the democratically ruled island of 24 million that the Chinese Communist Party claims as part of its sovereign territory despite never having controlled it. Okay, that's Western propaganda right there. Of course, they're siding with Taiwan. But again, this is all ideological, guys. Don't try to justify one side or the other. Or if you do, more power to you. Personally, I would advise you not to trust in men, trust in God, because all of this will eventually lead to the end of the world in nuclear conflict. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has refused to rule out the use of military force to bring the island under Beijing's control. Again, China seems to be a little bit more thoughtful or more reserved, and naive, I would say, as opposed to Russia. I don't know how Xi Jinping plans to take control of the island through democratic means when literally the government of Taiwan declares itself independent and the U.S. is constantly sending weapons. So this is almost a blunder on Xi Jinping's part there. But again, they could be saying that and they could be preparing for the invasion. Of course, we've seen countless reports, every couple of weeks of Chinese airplanes invading or going past the identification zone there between China and Taiwan. So, these warplanes constantly fly over Taiwan, and that's why I say don't take what Xi Jinping is saying at face value. Of course, they could be preparing for an invasion, and I think they are. CNN reviewed an advanced copy of the report titled "The First Battle of the Next War." On the 2000 war scenarios run by the CSIS, which said the project was necessary because previous government and private war simulations have been too narrow or too opaque to give the public and policymakers a true look at how conflict across the Taiwan Strait might play out. So it looks like the government is directly now getting involved in these simulations since they failed epically to predict the Russian conflict. There's no unclassified war game out there looking at the U.S.-China conflict, said Mark Hansian, one of the 3 project leaders and a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. One of the games that are unclassified, they're usually done once or twice. CSIS ran this war game 24 times to answer 2 fundamental questions. Would the invasion succeed and at what cost? Again, guys, I did go over this article, and one big thing they're not taking into account is nuclear weapons. Like, the U.S. seems to be, ignorantly naive about this. They like to pretend that, nuclear weapons don't exist. And that's playing a big factor in the conflict in Ukraine right now. The only reason the U.S. and NATO aren't sending their best weapons, their best tanks, their best warplanes, their best missiles is because they've said they're scared that the conflict in Ukraine might escalate. Well, they're in the middle of a war. They're fighting for their survival. So how could it possibly escalate anymore? Nuclear conflict. Why is the U.S. worried? Because they know that that's a mutually assured destruction. They know that Russia can literally destroy the world with its over 5,000 nuclear weapons. And China can pretty much do the same, so can the US. So I don't know how they carry out these simulations without taking nuclear weapons into account, when the same thing would probably play out in Taiwan, in my opinion, that is going on right now in Ukraine, except this could be a lot more deadly, since the conflict would be more ferocious based on the fact that there is water here between China and Taiwan. So you can imagine ships will literally have to make their way here across the water and land, touch ground, and Taiwan is going to start firing immediately, and that's just going to be like all out war with jets and missiles. And yeah, that would be a lot more ferocious for sure than what is going on in Ukraine right now. Let's see here. It says the United States and Japan lose dozens of ships, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of service members. Such losses would damage the U.S. global position for many years, the report said. In most scenarios, the U.S. Navy lost 2 aircraft carriers and 10 to 20 large surface combatants. Approximately 3,200 U.S. troops would be killed in 3 weeks of combat, nearly half of what the U.S. lost in 2 decades of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. Again, those are very conservative numbers, and that's assuming the U.S. would get directly involved with their troops, which I don't think they would. China also suffers heavily. Its navy is in shambles. The core of its amphibious forces is broken, and tens of thousands of soldiers are prisoners of war, it said. The report estimated China would suffer about 10,000 troops killed and lose 155 combat aircraft and 138 major ships. Taiwan would be devastated. The scenarios paint a bleak future for Taiwan, even if a Chinese invasion doesn't succeed. While Taiwan's military is unbroken, it is severely degraded and left to defend a damaged economy on an island without electricity and basic services. The report, the island's army would suffer about 3,500 casualties. Again, that's very conservative. And all 26 destroyers and frigates in its navy will be sunk, the report said. Japan is likely to lose more than 100 combat aircraft and 26 warships, while the U.S. military bases on its home territory could come under Chinese attack, the report found. But CSIS said it did not want its report to imply a war over Taiwan is inevitable or even probable. The Chinese leadership might adopt a strategy of diplomatic isolation, gray zone pressure, or economic coercion against Taiwan, it said. Well, that's usually a prelude to actual conflict. But seeing that the U.S. keeps on supplying weapons and seeing that Taiwan declares itself independent and is arming itself in case of an invasion, I don't see any other way for Taiwan to exert its dominance, China to exert its dominance over Taiwan besides a direct conflict. Again, you can go read the rest of this article here, but pretty much, again, China has been sending warplanes over there trying to scare Taiwan. Taiwan keeps pretty much reinforcing itself with American help and American weapons. And so eventually, I do believe this is going to be a conflict. This is going to be another war there. I don't think, again, the U.S. is willing to risk nuclear war over the Taiwanese. I think they're going to do their best to prepare Taiwan as much as they can. And later on in the report, they actually talk about the fact that, the best thing to do is to have Taiwan be as ready as they can before the war starts. Because once the war actually starts, it's going to be very difficult for the United States and other countries to supply weapons to Taiwan, because this isn't geographically, it's not the same situation that we're seeing right now in Ukraine over here. You can see that the U.S. is able to move weapons into Ukraine through Poland and all these other countries, but in the case of Taiwan down here, because it is surrounded by the sea and it is so close to China, it would be very difficult for the United States to send tanks and other weapons over to Taiwan. So what they're saying is that they need to get as much weapons as they can over there before this conflict takes place. Now, what is my personal opinion? I'm not sure if. Again, I think China seems to be a lot more conservative than the Russians and a lot more naive. But according to them, this is like a big issue that has to do with honor for them in the world stage. Um, and so it looks like they are set on, exerting their dominance over Taiwan. But again, it's pretty much a, U.S. satellite state at this point. And at some point, the Chinese are going to have to go through with their word or they're going to be embarrassed. And so I think they are going to launch an invasion. But again, I think this is only going to create a wedge here between what are going to be the two sides that are going to face off against each other in a world war. Of course, one side having China and Russia and the United States, with its allies being on the other side. Do I think a nuclear war is going to start over Taiwan or Ukraine? No. Do I think this is sort of the beginnings of what will eventually be a nuclear conflict? Yes. Right now, I think that China is, I think it's in a worse position than Russia was, because, Taiwan is an island and it's constantly being reinforced with the weapons it's receiving from the United States. And so the longer the Chinese wait, the more difficult it's going to be for them, later on in an actual conflict. So, very interesting stuff here. But yeah, the truth is stranger than fiction. Anyways, let me know your comments down below. Let me know what you think of this. Let me know if you agree with, these simulations the United States carried out here. Let me know how you think the conflict would play out. And if you think that, this is going to start anytime soon here. Yeah, I'm interested to hear your opinion, guys. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful day, and God bless.